One more thing I want to talk about. So this is called the real estate death cycle, which I thought was interesting, right? From friends, I was like, man, this is that's a real estate agent death cycle. And I was like, man, this is so true. And it kind of runs into two main things. And so you see it happen. This is true for veterans too, but it comes through by how agents operate. And what you see are really four main parts, right? The first part they come in, which measures everything, which is really we can't help. And this is everybody's pretty, you come out in the beginning, everything's measured on output. So what does that mean, you think? Dials. So I can't help you if you can't make the dials, can't make it to a certain level. Now that's obviously for newer people who are advanced, right? It's important to understand what's my actual output. This comes to dials, quality of dials, and also in addition to that, the execution of dials. And so this is something true on the seller side, anybody in your bucket. One of the biggest weaknesses that we have, almost called epidemic, is people were calling and we're not leaving voicemails and not text messaging. Right? Count in some cases 16 calls in a row with no text message or voicemail. That is basically wasting time. Why? Because people don't know who you're even calling, right? And so some are text message responders, some are voicemail responders. What you're noticing now, less and less people respond to text messages, right? Even people that know me, they don't respond sometimes if I'm reaching out about something in terms of like business or recruiting, whatever it is. And so that's something I've noticed too, but output is quality of output too. Makes sense? But this is where everybody starts at. This is the cost of entry. But you got to measure that because I'm going to talk about in a second what happens. So output's the first part. So somebody comes in, makes dials, whatever it is. Second part, output leads to something else. What do you think it is? Skills. So agents come in, they have output, based on the speed of output, develops their skill. Now if I'm making $50 a day, how long will it take me to develop skills? A lot longer, right? Make $100 a day, can develop skills. Now, if I'm only making dials, but I'm not doing personal development, what happens to my skills? Takes a lot longer. If I'm not measuring my appointments in my phone and recording it, or my appointments, what happens to my skills? Takes a lot longer to develop, right? And so that's part of the grind. I'm going to get to this, it'll make sense in a second. Right? Like we gave Bobby's example. Hey, once you start measuring, tracking, listening, responding, what happens to your skill set? Why? Yep, everybody does this, right? And some take longer than others, right? We had a perfect example of someone who didn't make it with us say, hey, I just don't think this is for me, right? Ryan and I talked about it a month or so ago or a couple weeks ago, and I asked for the first question I asked. How much personal development did the person do? And what did you tell me? Zero. So you got somebody who comes in who's brand new, who's never sold anything, who's not good at sales. They want to make it. They do the output. They get their brains beat in, but they do zero personal development. Does it make sense? No, I can't figure it out either, right? I know if I suck at sales, I got to figure a way to get good at sales. If I don't want to get my brains beat out for 9 or 12 more months, right? I don't want to learn how to play NFL football just getting hit. I'd much rather practice and throw the ball and, come a whole life and learn how to do things. But people don't. So there's two ways to do it. Number one, through action, right? Which is things like what? Well, that would be through making phone calls, getting objections, evaluating objections. Like Joe said, kind of listening to it, going back, figuring out, am I sticking to script, am I getting off script, whatever it is. Second way here is personal development, right? And I think the third way to do this is kind of what Bobby's example is, reflection. This is the fastest way. You can listen to yourself on a phone call and learn 10 times as fast as me coaching you. Would you agree? The problem is people just don't want to do it because they want to step on the scale, right? So this is important. Now, people come in, do the output, boom, they start learning, they're super hungry, want to do great. They get the skills, basic enough skills, right? And then what happens third?
Stop doing it.
They get, not yet. They get conversion. So now they get conversion, which means what? Something starts working, right? Get some people in your bucket, get some appointments, get a couple contracts, and then that brings more problems. But in reality, here's what happens. Let's say I have 100 leads, right? I'm getting 3 out of those converted. Make sense? Not bad, not terrible, right? Here's what happens. Agents come in, they do the output, develop the skills, get conversion. What do you think number 4 is? Now they think they arrived. So the agent comes in, they think they arrived, right? So now it feels the same on the listing side too, right? They come in, think they arrived, then boom. What happens? They stop with output. And so what happens is this output comes in, right? They down the output, they're making lots of dials, but now they think, hey, look, I'm really good, I got the basic skill set. So they also stop doing what? Personal development, role playing, sharpen the skills, all the pieces here that help get them there and build a skill set to increase conversion. And so what happens is now they go back, it's like they arrive, and what they end up doing is they end up staying there in a very low trajectory that kind of goes up slowly but surely. This right here also leads to burnout. right? Frustration. Why? Because the growth stops. Makes sense? And so in most people, that becomes the death of the agent, at least from a growth standpoint. They can stick through it and slowly grow, which is good, but most people have this feeling that they arrived, right? The ones that win the most turn this piece here into an evolving loop. And I'll show you what that means. So the ones that win the biggest have a much bigger square, so to speak, right? In terms of how they do that, they do the output, they develop the skill set, they're constantly evolving the skill set. So that would be things like what? New objections, challenges, how do I increase conversion, how do I convert things faster in terms of timeline, how do I get higher price points, whatever it may be. They're constantly obsessed with the skill set increase. Make sense? Because they know that the output times the skill set is what your results are. Does that make sense? So if I have high output but shitty skill sets, what happens to my conversion? It's a lower number, right? Now if I have let's say I'm a 7 output, but I'm a 6 skill set. Right? What's that? Lucas? 13, right? No, times. 42, right? Now, let's say here, able to go to a 9 output, 9 skill set. What's that? 81. What's my output? Almost double. Right? And so that's the difference of here's what the top agents who evolve consistently for long term and have a very high, and here's the crazy part. As I get my skill set higher, I can get more output with what? Less work, less time. This is where it gets interesting, right? So what do true elite people do and elite salespeople do is consistently on 10, 20, 30-year careers in this is instead of feeling like they arrive, what do they do here? Now the top agents, they get to stage 4. What do you think they do? They repeat. So they came through the initial one, right? They did the output, get the skill set, the output. Most are stuck at 42. Most are really if you look at most numbers, really being honest, you're at a 6 and a 4. Most people, right? And so I'm constantly looking here. But most people, they go right back to a couple skill sets, a couple deals, best month of their career, whatever it is, and all of a sudden they let go off the output. And they definitely stop doing skill set. You guys read me on this? And so here's the crazy part. Now, if I can go from 100 out of 3 to 20 out of 20 out of 100, what happens then? Making more money in the same amount of time. This is where you want to take this from a death scroll or a death kind of model, right? Where people get stuck here. And I don't mean death as in getting out of the business necessarily, death in your growth and growth in your business. Most people have stopped their skill set. I'm here to say 20 plus years in the business, I'm obsessed with skill set. I'm obsessed with getting better. I'm obsessed with podcasts. I'm obsessed with, why? Because I know I got to keep getting better to evolve in the marketplace, right? For me as a leader, I got to get better, continue leading you guys from the front. And I know there's different challenges. It feels like to me it's getting a lot tougher over the years with more competition and challenges. So I know if I can do that, it allows us to be ahead of the game. Does that make sense? But you got to make sure you're constantly evaluating what? Output, skill set. But I can't allow myself to feel like I arrived. And these people have been in the business for a while, man. This is important to do. This is how you burn out on the listing side, especially. I've had this conversation with Jeremy a lot too. It's, hey, I know you feel frustrated right now. How much personal development have you done the last 7 days? Why is that important? But deeper than that. Energy. Why? Because if I'm doing this over and over, especially the listing side where it's brutal, and you got people who think their house is worth way more than it is, and you got crazy clients and crazy agents, all these people complaining, issues and challenges, what does that do to your mindset? Makes it bad. So you got to constantly be pouring into yourself from other people, borrowing that and borrowing that energy from the external to fill the internal cup, because what happens to my clients, they can read my energy. My energy's, guess what? They're going to feel that and the conversion goes down here, right? Which is, this is conversion. I'm not sure I wrote output. That's conversion. So the conversion piece here. And so I want you guys to understand this is an equation for no matter how long you are in the business. And I watch this. And if you go back to any time you feel like you're in a stall, anytime you feel like you're in a slump, what's typically missing? Output or skill set. Typically it's going to be your skill set focused. Because most agents, most people do just enough. And like I said, I can look at most people's eyes and tell how much a person has helped in the last 7 days. Obviously you've been doing it for a while, but your client, they can feel your energy too. So if I'm pouring into myself, I have the ability to do what? Pour into other people, particularly my clients. And so that's going to be the equation you got to focus on. Okay, how do I make sure, and if you're struggling, hey, look, there's a way to figure it out. Somebody's always somewhere, somehow. My job is to figure out who it is and what they're doing. Make sense? And most of the time I can just borrow it from somebody who's crazy enough to always be like that, at least on the outside. People like that, Grant Cardone, Jordan Belford, Jerry Minor, for me it's Garrett White. They're just crazy all the time. They're constantly doing that stuff. They may have darkness at home, off camera or whatever it is, but I don't care. I'm borrowing whatever they have there, and that's so I can bring it with me when I'm on the field. Does that make sense? That's something that's super important, ideally to make sure I'm focused on. What are you guys hearing from this? And so my goal, if I do it right, is just like this. Every single time I go around the loop, what do? I build a bigger box. And what that is my capacity expanding as a salesperson, as an expert. And so if I do it right, the output feels much smoother because I'm able to get a lot more done in less time. I know where to fire the gun at, where to have the sniper rifle at. I'm no longer just shooting shotguns all the time, right? I have past clients to work from. I have current clients to work from. I have a much bigger bucket, right? Someone who's been in the business for 10 years is going to have a different output game than someone who's been in the business for 2 years. Does that make sense? And so that's because you have a timeline, a period, and a bucket of people that you have allows you to do. And that compounds over time, which is why consistency is so important. What I notice, even people who've been in the business for a long time, they stop right here, and the skill set stops, which keeps away their leverage. Now, in addition to that, I believe there's inflation in the marketplace too. What does that mean, you think? But let's say, what do I mean by inflation in terms of the marketplace? Yeah, there's a lot more competition, a lot more regulations, a lot more issues. About 10 years ago, now people don't trust anything you say. And so with that being said, if my skill set stays the same as it did 5 years ago, well, what happened? Getting crushed, right? I might be able to survive. That's why I was talking to a lot of agents who are getting out the business now. People have been from out of town. A buddy of mine was in town from Charlotte this weekend, and he was like, man, this is just the toughest year ever. I'm like, yeah, it's pretty tough, right? But he's like, man, it's one of those things you can tell and what's happening. Things ain't like they used to be, right? And so you have two options. I can level up my skill set and my mindset and who I am so I can rise above that level of inflation, aka difficulty, or I can fall back below that and be beat up consistently. Does that make sense? And so if you're struggling, it's one of these two places at all times. Now, are we going to fall off sometimes? Yeah, but you got to be able to course correct and realize what you're doing. I wanted to give you guys a visual that you can have to figure out where you're at. Anytime you feel like you're going backwards, no matter what level you're at, it makes a big difference. This is something Jeremy and I talk about a lot on the listing side because it's a mentally taxing piece. And especially, you get 40, 50 listings, people are constantly complaining. They think way more than it is. And so you got to be on top of your game to be able to evolve. Now, you add on top of that, prices dropping 13% for condos, market slowing down, right? All this stuff, higher days on market. You got to be able to stay on top of this or it gets very brutal very quickly. This game can be quicksand if you're not staying above it and on top of it in the development piece. But more than anything, it just charges your battery. And how do I do that? You got to systematize it. You got to make sure you have it consistently each day. I like to do it at specific times. Make sense? In 2 ways, it's got to be, I can't remember the word I used for it, but remember podcasts are more like passive, right? That's something to kind of fill things up. I can borrow from that, but I need learning stuff too, which would be things more like a course. Those are things like Jordan Belfort, Grant Cardone, Jerry Minor. Why? Because as I learn something new, it lights up things for me, and now I can try new stuff, which gives me more hope, which makes me more open to trying doing things. Does that make sense? I learn a new objection handler, boom, now I feel more confident, and it'll move forward and actually use that. Does that make sense to you guys? So that's why it's so important. That's why I still do it. That's what gets me excited to come, hey, I got this new I can say here, this new thing I can practice here. Oh yeah, I forgot about this. This is how you get where you're constantly staying on top of it. But you got to be obsessed with these two, and then you measure here so you can understand, okay, what's my conversion like? But my goal, and this is one thing this is what I'm trying to get to, is everyone thinks they need more leads. You don't need more leads. More leads equals more chaos. What you need is what? More conversion, more conversion, more conversion. And so if you start looking at myself, hey, what do I convert on a 1 to 100? How do I get this up to eventually I'm at 50 out of 100, right? How does that work? Initially, it's going to be my appointments, right? So on every phone call I make, how many calls do I got to make to get an appointment? Make sense? Let's say for most people, let's say, to keep numbers simple. 10 conversations I can book, let's just say 5 appointments, which is not, it's hard for some people, but let's just say keep the numbers simple, right? Now, of the 5, how many are going to show up? 2 to 2.5, right? Typically half of that. Of that, we can sign both those. Eventually one may buy it later on. So my goal is, okay, how do I get this number up here? And then after I get the number up for appointments, let's say a bigger number, but let's say 7, how do I get this up to 4? And so I'm constantly increasing that, and this all adds up to conversion here. And so my skill set needs to be added based on where I'm at. But your skill set is not going to get better unless output's up too. If I make $20 a day, don't matter how good your fucking skill set is, you ain't going to sell. Make sense? So that's why this is the cost of admission to get in. This is how well you're going to be able to get conversion. This is how you want to measure and see how good I am. And this is the constant game you're chasing forever. But life becomes way more fun when this number gets really high. Now you're hunting and fishing, knowing what you're doing, versus someone who's brand new. Fishing sucks if you fish for 4 hours and don't catch, right? Fishing gets real fun, you fish 4 hours and catch 20 fish. Make sense? And so through that process comes with really output skill set, okay? Does that make sense, you guys? Questions about that? What are you hearing? Kim, what are you hearing from that?
I can tell you from listening to Grant Cardone, he talks about, he goes, look, if there's one thing I could really share with you is get good phone skills, because it's going to take you a long way, because most people don't have the skills on the phone.
What's an example of output that's been driving me crazy? Output. We measure it. So making certain dials people, right? What I was noticing a lot of times the voicemail wouldn't get left or the text wouldn't get sent, right? But what's a simple way to double output potentially in the same amount of time? I built out a simple drop down for a text message. You wrote the text message out. Now you call, leave the voicemail, hit one button, boom, text message is sent. Now obviously people in your bucket for you guys in general, but now I can double output at the same time. This is where the obsession comes with conversion. I'm obsessed with it. Most people just can't figure out why it's not working. You got to be obsessed with this piece, and this is where the skill set comes in. So now I have a drop down. Now we had 3 different messages examples I think we have, right? Based on one's the first call that you have, the second call, whatever it is. I do the drop message, and sometimes, what do we know? I can send the same message 3 times, eventually answer on the 4th. That's where you got to be good at. Understand that. But I got to play the long game, understand the psychology, how people work. I got on Joe about that too. Joe was making lots of calls, right? $200-$300 a day. What was the challenge? You don't have enough time to leave all the voicemails. So how do we fix that? Pre-recorded the voicemail, so all you got to do is hit one button, boom, boom, boom. Now, I'm going to make it $200 a day and 10 voicemails to $200 a day, 200 voicemails, and they don't answer whatever the number, let's say 150 don't answer. What happens to conversion? It's mathematically impossible for conversion not to go up if I had the voicemails in 150 of those people I don't talk to. Does it make sense, you guys? And so this is what I'm obsessed with in terms of how I do that. Okay?
Output to me is my will. I had a strong will, but my skill set was down. So what we did, you and I met and talked about what's going on. You helped develop a skill that would help me go back to the table, so that I'm always looking at the will and skill. So if my skill set's off, I develop that a little bit, and then my will gets stronger and more positive because I'm getting the better outcome.
Yep, and we track the numbers. So with that, just the message we add to it, it brought 17 incoming calls to the inbound Sierra number just from him making those extra text messages, just in the last 7 days. So 17 people called back, which is very rare in this business, right? Called back potentially to work with us. There are 17 inbound calls just from adding the text message to that piece. Make sense? And so that's the one thing that makes it much different, right? Now, on the general brokerage buyer side, we're hammering with 6 to 10 calls a day. That's why we're not sending 10 messages. Does that make sense? But anybody in your bucket, you got to realize if you're calling your bucket and not leaving detailed voice messages and text messages every single time, you're wasting time. Make sense? But it's very important to just understand. Now, how do I know what's the key part about conversion? Measuring it. Because I got to be able to test and know what works. I'll lead you guys, give you examples, but you got to make sure you're moving through this. So I want you to take a second, right? Hopefully you drew some notes or something out. Where am I at right here, and where do I fall off? My veterans, they tend to do this right here. They feel like they arrived, all of a sudden they wake up and they, man, this sucks. I feel burned out. No shit, because you haven't been increasing your skill set, haven't been doubling down what you're doing, haven't measured the output, right? And when I output, I mean optimizing output. How do I optimize the same amount of time, but I do more stuff that gets more result? Okay? So, question about that? Make sense? All right, so last thing I'm going to teach something I think will be super helpful for you guys.